Carlina Duan is a writer from Michigan. She's the author of I Wore My Blackest Hair, an Alien Miss, her most recent book. Her work has appeared in Narrative Magazine, Poets.org, and Gulf Coast, among other publications. Carlina holds an MFA from Vanderbilt University and currently teaches and studies at the University of Michigan as a PhD student in the joint program in English and Education. She admires basketballs and gardens. Ambalila Hemsell is a writer from Colorado. She is the author of Queen in Blue. She holds an MFA from the University of Michigan and is a former writer in residence at Inside Out Literary Arts in Detroit. She is a recipient of a Kundiman Siwani Fellowship and a Pushcart nominee. Her poetry can be found in Fairy Tale Review, Columbia Journal, and the Literary Review, and elsewhere. She lives in Tacoma, Washington with her family. They can't hear you, but they can sense you through the powers of the internet. So please join me in a round of applause and welcoming Amelia Hemsel and Carlina Duan into your living rooms.
Thank you so much, John, for that intro. Leela, do you wanna say hi, and then I can start reading?
Hi.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. We're so grateful, and also so grateful to Literati for cultivating so much good community and literary space over the years. So I'm going to be reading a set first, and then Leela will read after me. And so I'll just kind of go ahead and get started. I wanted to just say, even before I start reading, that I'm definitely feeling the weight of this week, and have been thinking very much about the women and the victims of the Atlanta shooting on March 16th. And so I just wanted to start off with a poem, kind of thinking about lineage and embodiment and what it means to live and survive and think about that. And so I'm mourning the loss of these women and the 8 victims, 7 of which were women. And I wanted to start with a poem from my book, Alien Miss, which I will hold up to the screen. And this is a poem called Attending Compline Service as a Non-Believer. Wearing ripped jeans and clogs while onward, women part their lips and let loose the song. Lord, have mercy. It has been a long year, and the rosé has tripped from a glass cup, sloshed down my waiting throat. Prayer as night falls, for memory to unreal peel back, for grief to release its thick hold. In a room full of candles, I forget myself. Amen, the glossy notes keep ringing. Once, I was younger. Baba and I walked through the Galleria dell'Accademia. David stood, a body suspended in pristine white. Glory in the calves, in the straight spine. What he didn't own ran through my body, the low mud of speech. Years later, speaking to men I loved, I said what I didn't mean. Let words drip out of me like fat beads of milk. I said I would forget, but here memory muzzles desire, covers me in its pelt. In the dark pews of a church I don't belong to, I come apart. Made alien tonight by a river of sound, unwinding itself through one ear, sticky before exiting the other. Lord, look at what I've made. In a year designed by loss, still, I watch white moths flicker toward the light. I wrench open my mouth to say it. In me lives an entire spool of thread. I am a daughter of a daughter of a daughter of a daughter. And yes, they survived so I could sit on a bench in another country, watching women pry open their lips to leak it out, as it was in the beginning, as it always is. I begin with a woman inside of me, turning on the lamp, reciting the words, Amen, Amen. So yeah, I have just been feeling an incredible weight, I think, all week, and thinking also about the interconnectedness of history. The book Alien Myths that I wrote is it's a lot of things, but it's also a collage type poetry book where I'm thinking a lot about the history of Chinese American immigrants, specifically in relation to the Chinese Exclusion Acts. And so I wanted to read a poem, the next poem, which is, it's called Alien Myths Consults Her Past, and it's part of a sequence of poems that are all titled Alien Myths. Alien Myths is an intergenerational character who's comprised of both my own autobiographical experience and also comprised in part of historical research and poetic imagination. And so the poem that I'm about to read also has some found text in it as well, from a letter to Congress that was written in the context of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So just to preface this poem with that. This poem is called Alien Myths Consults Her Past. On Angel Island, she finds a bolt of blue linen cloth, moles on the chest, boats, men who boarded them, bound for a golden country, to pave, to stave off hunger, labor. What's an American dream but a debt, a price to pay? How to say, longing, longing, oh, say, can you see? Vowels opened, bare feet hitting the grass, lawn sprawls of land, touching foot to ground, foot to hardwood floor. Water, then more water. Slats of light against a lawn wall. Saying her own name to a room. Holding a pool of water on the ton. Saying her own name to a tree, to another head, its river of hair matted on the pillow, barred from entry, barred from country, barred while carrying a chain link fence, lawful, feral, fearful, what's in the past is in the past is in the past. Quote, that these threats and intimidations and riotous bloody acts in this nation which claims to be a leading nation in intelligence, morality, and culture shock our sense of national pride. The past is in the future in a woman who strips down before crawling into a barrack's lonely bed. Above her, the cloth hangs to dry. Goosebumps on the skin. Practices saying the words out loud. By the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed, what so proudly we hailed, what so proudly, so, oh. And so I guess in the context of thinking about history and lineage, I'm gonna read this next poem that is a love poem, and it's dedicated to women who I consider to be a part of my own creative lineage. This is called Vision While Running on the Vanderbilt Indoor Track. 3 minutes in, and those I've dared to call God in my mind push me on. Teresa Tung, Clara Lee, my nai-nai, clad in blue silk slippers, shouting, go, go, while my will sags into the folds of a wet tank top. Brown track, white shoelace, blue, smooth love I had for the river I flew past on a train last spring, returning to a square room with somebody who wrapped gifts for me and left them in a pile on the wooden table, books about olive trees shying beneath shimmering sleeves of paper, but shh. Nai-Nai sits on the bridge of my nose, telling me to shut up. Wallowing in heartbreak won't serve you a mile, she snaps, and I'm sluggish, heavy, panting 1,000 hurried breaths, watching the basketball sail in lean arcs below the track, the clock flashing red pixels, the ceaseless dribble. When I think I can't survive, the next minute, the next hour, February with all my lonely and beads of sweat. Women slip into their clouds and chop off their hair, let it hail over me, black stuff, the scent of licorice and steam. I'm running, carrying these women in my shoes, on my back. They're hollering my name, cracking into me like oyster shells with wild tongues, clacking sets of teeth. I can't go on, I try to tell them, but they're playing pool in my mouth, saliva beads, and I swallow, tiny woman in my stomach telling me they're the boss of me now. Go run, run, the way they did all those years ago. Nai learning how to read by salvaging newsprint from the factory's lean bins, deciphering the curly characters, she, her, hers, mouthing the words for change. Running her way to night class after canning each aluminum tub of peaches. Clara Elizabeth Chan Lee running to the polling booth, her name laid fresh on a sheath of paper, run, gripping the ballot tight in her fists, darkening bubbles, tracing each letter's swoop and curl. I choose. Teresa Tung running to a microphone, her tongue flitting between Mandarin, Hokkien, Cantonese, English, high notes strung like lines of syrup across a room. Ni wen wa ai ni yo duoshen. Run into the moon or into the sun girls would swing into decades later, eating bagels with cream cheese at the car wash. Teresa's voice shrill and hopeful, discs blasted on loop. Run, the woman in me chant, enclosing me in earthbound duty, till I'm whirring, mid-flight, leaving behind one step, 1,000, run, I'm loved, I love, run, till I can't feel the ache in me anymore, and I'm not lonely, I'm stuffed to the seams with old laughter, throngs of it, a line of women in my chest, urging me to let it fly, blessing me to move. I always feel like my heart rate goes up whenever I read that poem. So I think I'm just gonna read for like a little bit more, and then I'll turn it over to my brilliant co-reader, Leela. I am going to read a poem next that is very much about linguistic violence and power and reclaim. One of the things that I'll say about this poem is that there on the page, there's actually, it'll be hard to show this on the screen, but there's a blank. And so whenever I pause, there will be a kind of blank. So if you're imagining this in your mind, you can just imagine like a blank line. And I think I'll just read 2 more poems. So this is called, Do You Have a Grammatically Correct Response to the Question? And remember the time I stood at the intersection carrying my black suit of hair, and the woman stopped in her shiny car, rolled down her window to scream something vulgar, something clinking inside her mouth, a word, a system of grammar flipped to fury, red, ripe, railing at me. For what? My body? My attention? Anger is often in response to a boundary crossed. What was that boundary? Where were my legs? Why did I stand there without a word, holding the straw in my ice-cubed drink as the liquid turned warm and illegible between these jaws? Slosh, slosh. The woman stopped in her shiny car. The woman stopped to scream, "You," in her shiny car at me. Who is the subject of this sentence? Who is the object? What is the verb? Standard English grammar dictates the proper tense. Do I care about the proper? She spat at me. She said a bad word, a string of words demarcating my body, hit by grammar, hit by a field of letters, hid behind a lump in my throat while my body remained my body. My lungs pulled up the hot July air. My hair remained parted to the side as I clasped the straw, as I watched the tips of my feet, a body to be screamed at by a stranger. July, North American, a street. Which tense would you like to use to describe the incident above? The past, the future? I will eat leaves and pour vinaigrette, slow and skinny. I will feed the low opal of my mouth. In times of distress, I will turn on the stove. Garlic will be fried in a river of yellow oil. I will eat my letters, crunchy and fat, angry and swollen, soft and slathered in old-fashioned oats. I will try to pull up the words. Hit me, she did. Hurt me, I am. Language, she did. The word, I am not. On a North American street, on a hot July day, a woman stopped her car where I waited at an intersection to tell me I was on a North American street, on a hot July day, a woman stopped her car where I waited at an intersection to scream the word. Later, I wilted leaves in a hot pan. Later, I fed the story back to my mouth. Later, the syntax was rewound in a reel set aside, and I composed a new body of Roman letters out of my body. I pulled up words from their waggling roots and raised them to touch the edges of a face, a page, to cure and hold and praise and wriggle and snap and sister and alive, amen, and alive, amen, then defy and talk back. Thank you all. I'm just gonna read one last poem. I'm switching up my order here. Yeah, I think I'll read this one. This is one that I haven't read recently, so thanks for your grace in just sitting with me and listening to these poems. At the Portland Rose Gardens, I'm put in my place. Menstrual blood slides down my thighs in little jelly-like clots, the same way it slid out of me for years. Bursts of blood, up mountains, down hills. In the cable car of a Chinese city, my distant cousin spoke. A woman's energy is potent, she said. At high elevation, I bled while the ground swayed, trees mudded with foxes and the high cries of laughing thrush. That summer, he laid me down on a towel. We thrashed against each other on a hardwood floor, the blood molten, rushed, alive, alive. After, our hands streaked with red. The room smoldered, and he cracked a window for the fingernail moon. Days later, in an international airport, I gripped the white stick and let my urine tell me what it did. Those spare minutes before peeing, something ugly unseating my chest, won't want, can't want, blood, blood, blood come back. A year older, I'm still potent. On a morning opened up by sky as bare as I've ever seen it. On this side of the country, far away from him, there are no clouds. There are only my dark strings of red dangling like tapestry thread into the toilet's wet bowl. To bleed, to rinse, to watch my red labor pulse, invent. At the Portland Rose Gardens, I tussle the pink heads of a new species, damask, red leaf, prairie, musk, pollen clumped in swollen yellow globes. I'm here and living, which means I can forgive that summer now and everything I can't yet say. I am here and living, which means this morning I take my blood for a walk through the gardens where crops of creamy roses lift themselves to my hands and my red makes what it does, sliding out of me and into the bushes, craning its elongating thread. Thank you all so much for listening, and can't wait to pass the mic to brilliant Leela. Thank you for your poetry and for listening.
That was so good. I was so energized by all of those poems, but the food, fed the story back to my mouth, that line. But that last poem is one that I haven't heard yet also, and it was so amazing. And I'm so excited to put my poems in conversation with Carlina's. I'm just gonna jump in. I'm reading from my book Queen in Blue also. Oh yeah, one more thing. Yeah, I'm so excited to be pressmates with Carlina. Both of these books came out from University of Wisconsin Press, and also just like in a generation of poets with her. Alaska. Whenever my grizzly stories come up, I tell the one about the mother, her 3 cubs, her 3 bluff charges. Asked if I was afraid, I dodge, say, this is what you do. Walk backwards, speak to the bear, show her you are bigger than she thinks. The truth is, in those days, I did not know how to be afraid. But some years later, I too became a mother. I want the boys to see Alaska, Denali and tundra, a bit of earth uninterrupted. I'll teach them to blow their whistles and sing loud, look out for scat, and no matter what, never turn and never, ever run. Even the mother bear can be reasoned with. But here, I hear the news and my breath just goes. Another senseless, another childless mother, another bullet. The fear knows that I am large. I charge and charge and charge. So I was thinking about how like occasion poems and how horrible, violent shootings are an occasion that I have a bunch of poems for already in my book because I'm American in the 21st century. So I'll read one more that I wrote in honor of Charlena Lyles, who was a woman, a Black woman killed by police in Seattle. Morning for Charlena Lyles. After your death, I open a sweet shop and bake dusted lemon bars and violet macarons every day. Every day, I arrange them into peonies in the case. Every night, I polish the silver and glass. I want a place for you to feel enchanted and let your guard drop. Is it too late for that? You cross an invisible train track to get there. The neighborhood disappears in the slant northern summer. Is it too late? There are no guns allowed in the sweet shop, but your children have cake for free. I make them promise to brush their teeth. I never leave, never sleep. My hands fold butter into dough, slice apricots, measure in a cup on a scale with a knife. I never cry in the sweet shop, never hear the news again, just shake the cinnamon tin over the batter and master the making, the precious, the edible, the innocent. I have there's so many parts of this book that I feel are in direct conversation with alien myths. So I've basically chosen my set list based on that. It's just so fun to think about these books talking to each other. So I'm going to read a long poem now, and which is also about kind of maternal lineage and language. Jigsaw. 1. Mother, you never told me how your jigsaw skeleton was reorganized when you pushed the golden moon of my brother's skull through it. And when you pace the carpet of my attic, counting the minutes between my contractions, using the wristwatch you've always had, did you remember how long it takes for the puzzle of bones you gave me to break into river and rebuild into bridge? 2. Mother, it couldn't have been the watch with the feathers and stones. It was much more ordinary, but when I picture you looking at your watch, it is always the one from my girlhood, the gilded bird parts, jasper and turquoise. 3. Mother, your deformities are twinned in me. The willowy spine protests each bend and lift. The hips have yet to settle with the lopsided musculature above them. It is the pain that tells me how I am yours to the bone. 4. Mother, when I tell you, kids this age parrot everything, like it isn't working out or it's delicate. You tell me a story from your childhood. In it, all the Gujarati mothers vouvoyer their toddlers, so they will answer back with appropriate deference. You use the French, vouvoyer, to explain it to me. In the story, when you learn the informal conjugations, you stop speaking to your brothers like elders. For this, you are scolded, but don't care. They're your brothers, and like all children in Kenya colony, the 3 of you attend English medium schools anyway. 5. Mother, over the course of this conversation, the grudge I've held against you for never teaching me your mother tongue begins to budge. I try believing you all the times you insisted you didn't know how to teach us Gujarati. For the first time, stupidly, I hear the pain in that statement. 6. Mother, stupid is the word that started the whole thing because you said it once when I was 2 in English and I said it right back. 7, mother, I am raising my child in the country where I was born. Neither you nor your mother nor my own brother can claim this. It means something and it doesn't. 8, your body, mother, is the river and the bridge, the watch and the minutes. Languages pool in the pocket of your elbow, underneath your tongue. Your muscles span oceans. And then I see my body becoming yours. I think of the story where Yashoda looks inside Krishna's mouth and finds the universe there. I go to the mirror and open wide. I forgot to look at the time when I started.
I think you started around 7:30.
Okay, so I'm about halfway. Great. I shall keep going. I want to read the poem that follows that one in the book because it's related in terms of language. The Neighborhood, Akari, Rabat, Morocco. The man with the small sweet tomatoes, deepest red, dash of orange, dash of blue. He liked to throw an eggplant in for the boy, a little head of cauliflower. Taking my hand into both of his, sandstone palms, topography of decades, he would tell me the number of coins, number of days, number of nights in the holy month. Nearby, the cliffs strewn with glass shards, hovering sparks of light, and the hole that led straight down through the roof of the cave to sloshing green Atlantic. In July, at dusk, I would run the busy road along the sea. Sun like an apricot through the smog, smog coming in through the windows, uninvited guest. I went about speaking French to shopkeepers, who would anyway place their best fruit on my bad tongue. I want to read a couple Ann Arbor poems, and since I'm at Literati right now, and then I want to read some Queen poems because I feel like the Queen and Alien Miss are sisters. Borrowed or stolen, like children. In a glass house in Michigan, hibiscus blooms, mammoth huge, tusk splayed, hot pink and impossible. A colony of feral cats nests in the strip of woods between my driveway and the field, kittens born and kittens picked off. I am waiting for the egrets to return to the marsh, but they don't. I am waiting for my mother's papers to come, but they won't, not yet. Precariousness as old as regret. The stakes increase. My own child crawls into bed with me. We watch the deer nibble the trees, watch the rain green our view through the aquarium window. I never knew, was the hawk swooping for mice a sign of plenty or of doom? Would my bad choices ever pay off? Then again, there is power in being poor and happy. I learned this from my mother. You can hold it in your hands and crinkle it, dried beehive. You can press it, puffball mushroom. I am getting good at this. You can have a home, a house, a country, but none of it belongs to you. You just live in them and love them, borrowed or stolen, like children, all the same. Prayer. In a field dense with low clouds, the trees make their own light. This weird, hot autumn, sparkle dulled by dark dust on retreating glaciers. At the cider mill, they won't even start the furnace. Cold cider in this cool drizzle then. The children in their bright rain suits, sticky with apple juice, they give a name to the fat dead mouse they find lying next to the red radio flyer tricycle. Oh, to live in their sweet little world. The thing is, it's the same world. It's the exact same world. Cider mash crawling with electric yellow wasps. Listen, every October we find a praying mantis. Every October, just one. And I can't help taking it as an omen of what? That we will eat the ones we love the most, that our carnal nature is full of grace, that strangeness is all around us, hidden but alive. I'm comforted by her lean green body, those sideways alien eyes, the odd humanity of her clasped appendages. Her presence so close to the house can only be a blessing, visitation from a small God, benevolent and powerless. I'll close out with some poems that aren't exactly persona poems, but they sort of inhabit the voice of Lewis Carroll's Queen of Hearts, who became kind of an emblem for feminine rage, which was really important to me. My feminist anger is really important to me. And so the Queen of Hearts is sort of a person in this book. Queen of Hearts. The queen is beating around her bushes, yelling to the 10s and 5s, quick, quicken the blooms, redden the forlorn bleachy roses, their thorny teeth, their cliched form. The rogue hedgehogs tuck and roll, avoiding blush feathers and mineral beaks. Unlucky beasts break for the bushes. At night, she unlaces her corset, sloughs off exhausted gowns in hues, carmine, rubicund, and scarlet. She sips a neat sip. The blackness of the queen's night is eternal moonless sea floor, inside of mammalian heart, a silken slick machine. The queen is dreaming of a loon once heard in the Yukon on a lake so remote no one had ever named it. She dreams of losing sleep to the sound of a woman losing her head. I also thought of that poem when you were reading about the rose garden. Libra season. The queen is taking a shower. She thinks of Shakti, thinks of her boys, little Jack of Roses, Ganesh guarding the door, Shiva with his sword. the forest, the first beast, little gods, and how they grow. Outside, a tree in flames, the mountains breathing a haze of smoke even now, earth tilting slightly to the left, Alice in a gingham dress, blue checks, checkerboard to card deck, toppled white kings shooting up in the ruins of empire. The queen is, after all, queen of hearts. She feels it all. Her heart encompasses, compass rose, lily of the valley, precious and deadly, lace of white and red over blue ink, a whale, a spray of carrot flowers. Today, the shotgun must be cleaned. It's Rabbit Stew Tuesday. Fires to the west, Florence to the east. A thunderous applause. Indra or Zeus or Thor. Everyone has a god for that. Everyone has a story about human greed and a flood. The queen licks the blood from her blade. What we believe in is magic. What we believe is that our children are ready. We have taught them to look for beauty. They have learned to unleash their tempers. They will survive the fall. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you both so much. I just want to pause before just jumping in with a bunch of questions and let people sit with those poems. But as a reminder, if you're in the audience and you have questions for either poet, please, or both, please feel free to submit them. Maybe I'll just start in a way that reflects upon the work that you've shared and sort of what's on a lot of our minds, and maybe less a direct way, but more of an oblique way, but in the way you shared your poetry tonight. Obviously, it's very enraging and devastating to have occasion to have poems for things that keep happening, acts of violence, acts of racial hatred that are suffuse our country's history. But I mentioned to both of you before we went live, and also been thinking a lot about poetry as witness, and hearing you read it makes me think of it as well as poetry as sort of active witness. But I'm also curious to know, as both of you teach, I think sometimes we lose how we can, and we've had conversations on this series a lot with authors about like what can art do over and above what is constantly happening, and seems that it can't overcome those things. It can only be responsorial. What is the function of art, and the place of politics and action and all this other stuff. But hearing you both read, I also think about how not only is poetry, can poetry bear witness, but you both know perhaps better than I that affect the relationship between teaching and a writing practice. And so, boy, that's maybe a very convoluted question, but I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about, for those folks, or maybe there's me, who sometimes, fear or are worried about the function of art, especially poetry, to provide succor or to do more, as much as we possibly want them to do. How do you reflect on that work in the context of like also your teaching practice? And is there a dimension there that reflects on your work and informs your work, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Is it okay if I go first, Lila? So just to make sure I'm understanding your question, John, like how poetry of witness and or active witness affects or influences my teaching? Is that part of the question?
Yeah, and also just, I mean, I think the shorter question would have just been how your teaching informs your work as well.
Okay.
Because I think if works of witness are instructive and can be instructive to readers, and I'm wondering if there's a tie-in between your practice as a poet and your practice as teachers as well, that is a dimension that's important to reflect on, I think, for readers of poetry.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you for it. And I'm also really happy thinking about it because one of my teachers is watching the Zoom. So I'm feeling very lucky that Jeremy Chamberlain is on a screen somewhere watching this, one of my really formative teacher for me. But I think that, so I definitely think that for me, within my poetry and within my teaching, I'm recently, I would say in the past 5 or so years, and maybe even before that, actually started in high school. So I'm actually maybe in like the past decade or so, I've been really fortunate to have teachers that have encouraged me to think about ways of extending or questioning the archive, specifically in response to history. And so I think that as a teacher of writing and a teacher of language, I'm personally really fascinated by and sometimes very frustrated by the limits of the archive, and so where historical record stops. And I think that with the book Alien Myths in particular, I was trying to think actively about myself as a younger student of history. I recently actually was talking to a friend about this, but I think when I was, I didn't learn about the history of the Chinese Exclusion Acts until I was 18 years old. And I was sitting by myself in the University of Michigan, actually in the library stacks. And I looked at a book and it talked about the Chinese Exclusion Acts. And I had just grown up never having learned about this really important, this piece of American history that directly impacts my body. And so when I wrote the poems in Alien Myths, I was also thinking about how can I extend or expand that archival work of what sorts of histories we've been socialized to or taught to believe in, and what kinds of histories have either erased bodies like mine or made them disappear. And I think in my own teaching, it's actively about encouraging students or inviting students to also come from a point of question making and thinking. I'm thinking actually about Jeremy Chamberlain here too, since he's in the room. But when I was a freshman in college, he told me that curiosity is a muscle and you have to flex it. And I think often about that, even in terms of playfulness within my own poetry, in terms of making it, and then also inviting the students to really approach writing from a point of curiosity, experimentation, but also rigor. And so thinking about, of course, what's in the archive, what's not in the archive, why isn't it there? Am I or can I expand or subvert that?
I should say, because you're talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act, that here in Tacoma, I'm about a mile, I'm in my classroom, I'm about a mile away from Chinese Reconciliation Park, which is a public park here on the waterfront, that the city created to acknowledge the horrible, violent execution of that act here in Tacoma, where I am. So it's a history, and I teach in a school with a lot of Chinese students and Chinese American first and second generation students. So it's something that we engage with just by proximity to that particular history. But I think I talk about what Carlina is talking about in terms of the limits of the archive as an English teacher all the time, and what we can get from narrative that we can't get from history. And that because it's a voice and it's an individual voice, it implies a lot of other voices, and kind of like how narrative gives this dimension, a human dimension to history that we really need in order to understand it. And so I think, just teaching a variety of perspectives and asking my students to reach for those and reach for, what they can identify with in a perspective that they don't share. And then contributing to those perspectives being available for future readers, right? In my own work as a writer, I think those things are certainly kind of working together.
Thank you. Also, thank you for pulling out the through line through my very convoluted question. That's incredibly enlightening and appreciated. We have a question from Aldo, who writes, you talked about having a lot of poems about sort of mourning and eulogizing the shootings that happened here in this country and their victims. What work are you trying to do when you write eulogy? So what is, I guess the question is, what is the sort of the practice of eulogizing through the craft?
For me, it's personal work of processing my own grief. Basically, like, I think just wanting to work through it and also think through what my place is in it, as an American in this country in which this violence is so endemic and kind of ever present. I'm always trying to negotiate where I fit into that. And I don't know, I think sometimes you feel these losses really personally. I think in the poems that I've written that are for people that I don't know, I've written them as if they are my neighbor or somebody, or my sister, right? Like, and that's how it sometimes feels to me. And so for me, the poems that I've written in honor of people I don't actually know who have been killed, are trying to process the grief that I feel anyway. That I think is my answer.
Thank you. We do have a question, one more question, and we may have time for a couple more. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to send it, but otherwise this may be our last. The question from Jack is, what projects are you each working on right now? So we're celebrating your Ambalila's book came out last year, Carlina's came out this month. If you're comfortable sharing, what might be in store, or what projects, poetry or otherwise, are you working on?
I don't know that I can name any. I mean, I'm still writing things, but I haven't, in the year since my book came out has been quite a strange one. So everything feels really strange and like non-linear. So I've got some things in the works, but nothing has coalesced into a definitive project at this time.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar non-linear space of creating and being. I do feel like one thing that has been giving me a lot of kind of creative energy and juice is just collaborating with friends across different mediums. And so I have a really great friend who's an illustrator and artist named Grace Ludmere. So in the month of April of 2020, we were kind of trading back and forth. She was sending me like a sketch a day, and I was just sending her a very baby draft of a poem a day. And we're in the process of just trying to make that into some kind of zine. And so it's been fun to engage in just playful creative practice with friends. And that's really what I'm working on. And I think alongside, teaching, which is always an act of labor and love. So doing a lot of teaching, especially this year. Thank you for that question.
We do have one more question, which is, as a bookseller, my favorite question. So in addition to each other's books, which again you can buy at literatibookstore.com or in the links in the description below if you're watching on YouTube, a viewer wants to know what you're reading. I know that that's also difficult to ask for. This year I certainly have a pile on my bedside table that has not been touched in some time, but we're always curious to know what authors are reading, if you'd like to share any recommendations. And I also like to sometimes expand this out to like what you might be listening to or watching, as those recommendations are also welcome to all of us as well.
Yes. Thank you for that question. So I've been listening to a ton of audiobooks. And outside I'm in graduate school right now, so I'm doing a lot of like reading on the computer all day for school. But outside of that, I've been using, in case folks in the space want to use this or maybe are already using this, I've been using this app called Libby, Libby, just like a library audio and ebook app. And so I just finished, I turned when I got this question because I keep a little reading log in my journal. So this is a very opportune question for me to look at my reading log. But I actually just finished listening to C. Pam Zhang's How Much of These Hills is Gold, a really amazing kind of Western, almost Zhang kind of takes the Western genre and transports it to the two main characters are Chinese American and they're living in the West. And I'm trying to remember the year, but I don't remember. It's not set in contemporary like 2021, but years back. And so, and it's just this really beautiful, compelling novel about kind of familial lore and legacy and sacrifice, and also these questions of what happens when you're placed in a very particular space, and these questions of, I think, race and gender and also just siblinghood get imposed throughout the novel in really, really fascinating ways. So I just finished listening to that. On my nightstand right now, I'm rereading Severance by Ling Ma. And so hopefully folks have read this, but I think it's a fascinating pandemic read, given the fact that it was written before 2020, but also just a kind of apocalyptic novel that includes a almost pandemic-ish situation. And so it's been really interesting to read in the context of right now. So those are my two that I will throw into the ether.
I've been reading, How Much of These Hills is Gold was definitely one of my favorite books that I read in 2020. I loved it so much. It's so like many things that I like ghost story and Wild West story. But my favorite, like at the end of it, oh my God, it's so good. There's just also as, like whatever, child of an immigrant who grew up in the Mountain West and really, really loves that place. It's California, but the sense of place that those kids have and the way that they are at home in that landscape, even though they feel rejected by the people who have claimed that landscape, is just so beautifully written. So I would second that recommendation. I want to shout out to, as far as new books, Land of Big Numbers by Tae-Ping Chen, which is a short story collection. She's incredible. And I reread Camus' The Plague this year, which was also deeply fulfilling and cathartic, to just read somebody so smart and intelligent reflecting on, and eerily, similar to sort of the experiences we've been going through. So I'd recommend that. And as far as watching The Big Flower Fight on Netflix, which is a competitive flower arranging show, just simply can't be beat. It's maybe the best thing I've ever watched.
I did not know about this show, and now I feel like the rest of my Friday is set up. But we've reached the top of the hour. Ambalila Hemsel, Carlina Duan, thank you so much for joining us at Home with Literati this evening. It's so wonderful to be able to share your work, and we appreciate it. And we hope to have you in the bookstore soon, when conditions allow. But we hope you continue to stay safe and be well. And to all our viewers, thank you for joining us. We hope you continue to stay safe and be well, and we'll see you at the next event. So have a great night, everybody, and a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.